Mishnah Yismaid Katan, Parak Aleph, Chapter 1, Mishnah Aleph, Mishnah 1. Now, this chapter of this, it's called a Mayid Katan, which means a small holiday, literally. It's referring, small holiday, which is referring to Chol HaMoed. We know that when it comes to Sukkot and Pesach, you've got the first days of Yontif, the last days of Yontif, and then you have in the middle Chol HaMoed. And it's important to know that essentially, or let's call it the starting point, is that the same way there are prohibited activities on Yontif, on Shabbos, and on Yontif less than on Shabbos. We have prohibited activities on Yontif. Those activities essentially should be forbidden on Chol HaMoed also. It's just that we have certain rules about Chol HaMoed that, based on those rules or those categories, we're permitted to do work. We're permitted to do weekday activity. The reason why Chol HaMoed is like, we call it Chol HaMoed. Chol means the weekday, so to speak, the unholy part of, not the word unholy, but I don't know what the right word is, but the unholy part of Moed, or the less holier part of Moed. Like I said, I can't find a good English word for Chol right now.
Profane.
Yeah, that doesn't sound too great either. It's because in general we will be doing weekday activity on Chol HaMoed, which we don't do on Yontif itself. But that's because we have certain categories that allow us to do work. So, for instance, anything that's needed for the day, anything needed for the holiday, you're allowed to do. Okay, so I need for the holiday to drive my car to get to shul. I need to get placed to drive my car to put on lights. There's so much of our basic activities fall under what's called a need for the day, a need for Yontif. But then there are things that that go beyond that actually again are not part of what we need for that day, and they still should be prohibited. And still, there are other rules, other categories that allow these things to be done. So the example that we're going to have in our Mishnah is what's called davar ha'avod, to prevent loss. If there's a question of preventing loss, one can do malacha, one can do the activities that would typically be forbidden on Yontif and on Chol HaMoed. So here's our Mishnah. Mashkin beis hashlachin b'mayed ubishvias. One can water a field that needs constant irrigation, both on Chol HaMoed and on the Shemitah year. Now, on Yontif, can you water your plants? The answer is no. That falls under the malacha, the activity of zareya, planting. When you water ground, it helps things grow. It makes things grow. So the starting point at the beginning of the discussion would be you want to water your field on Chol HaMoed. It's a malacha. It's called zareya. It's called planting. Do you need it for Yontif? No. However, but we're talking here about a kind of a field that cannot just survive on rainwater. There are fields that can survive on rainwater. There are fields that need, in addition to the rainwater, they need irrigation. They need constant watering. So the Mishnah says, Mashkin beis hashalchin. A beis hashalchin literally translated means an area that's weak, a weak land. It needs a lot of water. It needs constant watering for it to be able to survive. So we are allowed to mashkin. We can water that kind of a field that needs constant irrigation. Even though watering the field is a malacha, it should be it's on Yom to be a forbidden activity no matter what. On Chol HaMoed, we are allowed to do it because it's davar avod. It would be a loss if we wouldn't otherwise do it. Just to point out, the wording of the Mishnah is ba'moed. Moed means the holiday. It doesn't mean the actual holiday itself. It doesn't mean on the Yontif. But whenever the Mishnah refers to what we call Chol HaMoed, it says moed. That's how the Mishnah refers to moed. So we say you can do it on Moed, you could do it on Chol HaMoed, ubashvius, and on Shemitah. Shemitah is the 7th year. Every 7th year, you have to leave the ground fallow. You can't plant it. You can't work with it. And one of the things that you wouldn't be able to do, theoretically, is water it. That's working the land. But the Mishnah says if we're talking about a beis hashalchin, we're talking about a well, at least the way the Mishnah says it, the Mishnah says that even during Shemitah, this weak field you're allowed to do. So you can do it on Chol Hamoed, you can do it on Shemitah. Now the truth is, they bring down here, the Bartanura brings down like this. During Shemitah, however, a person may water even a field that does not require constant irrigation, but can usually survive on rainfall alone. Our Mishnah is very specific that we're talking about a base hashalchen. That means a land that needs constant irrigation. And it says that's the field that the Mishnah says you can water. And it says you can do that on Chol Hamoed and on Shemitah. And if the Mishnah only tells us you can do that on a base hashalchen, on a weak field, and it says about Chol Hamoed and Shemitah, the words imply simply that even on Shemitah, that on Shemitah too, the only field to be allowed to irrigate is the one that if you don't, it's going to get ruined. But the truth is, says the Bartanura, that Shemitah is more lenient, and that even a field that doesn't need constant irrigation, you can still water it. You can still bring water to it, and that's because even if you have a field that could survive on rainwater, to make sure it has enough water, you're going to water it. You're going to bring water into it. So therefore, although you could be talking about a field that doesn't need the irrigation or the water brought in to survive, but because there is a purpose, there is a need for it, it serves a purpose for Shemitah, in order just to make sure there's enough water there, that's enough. That's enough a reason to allow it. And when the Mishnah, it's just that, when the Mishnah said, so the Mishnah when it comes to Shemitah is saying mashkin, you can water any field. But we decided to put Shemitah together with Chol Hamoed. And since Chol Hamoed, the only field you can water is the Beis Hashlachan, is the weak field, is a field that needs constant irrigation. Therefore, the Mishnah only mentioned it. But there's really a very big difference between what fields you can water on Chol Hamoed and what you can water during Shemitah. Then the Mishnah continues, Bein mimayin sheyatza metchila, whether we're talking about a spring that has just recently come out, been found, Bein mimayin sheyatza metchila, whether it is from a spring that the water has not recently emerged. You know, I don't know much about these springs, but it seems like, you know, you can find them. Like you could, you know, you find more springs, or there are springs that they emerge. There was a time they weren't, you know, the water wasn't springing up, and now it is. You've got old springs, you've got new springs, and it means a spring that actually was not, there was no water emerging from this area, and now it's sprung forth. So you've got the new springs and the old springs. Now the difference is like this: if you have a spring and you want the water from the spring to get to your field, you create a kind of a ditch, channel. Right? Mm-hmm. Some kind of a channel. Thank you. That's a better word. Some kind of a channel. Mm-hmm. Now I don't know if this channel is natural, if you make it, but the bottom line is that if it's a new spring, then the channel is new, and if the channel is new, there's more chance for the walls of the channel to collapse. So one might have thought that on Chol Hamoed, I can't use the water from the new spring, because maybe I should be afraid that if we allow to use that spring to bring the water into your field, that maybe because it's new, the walls are going to collapse. And if the walls are going to collapse, you're going to try to fix it. And the one thing that you can, and when it comes to Chol Hamoed, even if we're dealing with trying to prevent loss, if in order to prevent loss, you need what's called tircha yasera, you need a lot of effort, can't do it. Can't do it. The sage just said you can't do it. Can't take away from Chol Hamoed that far. Can't go that far for taking away from the spirit of Chol Hamoed, from the spirit of Yontif. So but the Mishnah says no, it's not that way. Whether it comes out, whether it's a new spring or it's an old spring, you can use it. And we're not so concerned about the walls collapsing. But the reason Mishnah is speaking it out is because you might have thought that by the new spring, we shouldn't let you use it because the walls may collapse. You're going to try to fix it, which takes a lot of effort. We say, no, we're not concerned with that. You could use the water from either one. Now the Mishnah says, but you cannot use water not from mei hakshamim, not from pools of rainwater, or from the waters of a well. Now, this means like this. Sometimes you have these pools of water. It's rainwater, right? It's rainwater that's gathered. You know, until now. Okay, we'll go back in a second with that. But right now we're talking about like this. So you had a pool of rainwater, and you want to get that water to your patch, to your garden, to your field, right? So what do? So I one time saw an article about this. Somebody went to an Arab village in Israel and watched how they did things like in the times of the Mishnah still. Basically, you got this pool of water, and you take your foot and you dig a groove in the ground, and the water now comes into your garden, now comes into your ditch. That's no big deal to do on Yontif. You want to do that on Yontif? You can do that on Yontif. Okay. But I'm sorry, back up, made it wrong, right? There's one way that you go ahead and you just, not a lot of effort, just dig your heel in, get the water over, no big deal. Then you've got a well. And for a well, you got to lower the bucket and you got to schlep up the water. So drawing from a well, that's a lot of work. That's a lot of exertion. And therefore, we would say, and therefore that you for sure can't do. But the sages extended and they said that even from that pool of rainwater that you just use your foot to get it over to the garden, that you can't do either. Because we wanted to make sure, because the sages were afraid, the well water for sure is a problem because of the fact that there's a lot of exertion involved. But if we would allow you to use that rainwater pool, even without a little bit of exertion, people might think if you can do that, you can do the well also. Because both of them are, I'm assuming, are rainwater. So therefore, when it comes to that you can't, so either one you can't do. From the pool of water, from the well, you cannot water your field. So to be honest with you, I'm thinking right now, so what can you use?
You open the faucet.
What can you use? Now, I guess you can use a spring, right? Yeah, there's a spring, natural spring, and you're going to direct the water to the field through the spring. So if you're talking, no, it's not. Apparently, it's not because you just have to somehow or another. First of all, maybe you have these are already established irrigation channels, canals. Now it's just a question of letting the water in or not. Maybe that's the way it works. But here, the rainwater and the well seem to be seen as the same because they're a gathering of water. It's like a gathering of water. And not obviously from a spring, maybe not obviously from a spring. That therefore we say both of those can't be used. But it seems like, if the water is going to come from a spring and it's going to come and that's how you're using it, you're not bringing and like I say, I don't know exactly what you're doing in one place more than the other. But in the case of the spring, I don't know exactly how it works, how you're watering the field. It seems like you're watering it. That means you either allow the water. It's a question of getting the water in there. So in a case where you're doing it from a spring, the Mishnah says you can do it. Again, if it's a Beis HaShalchan, if it's a weak field. So through the spring, you could do it. But when it comes to this pool of water from a well, that you can't do. And the last thing mentioned in the Mishnah you can't do, you cannot dig ditches for the vines. So what they used to do is they used to make these ditches around the roots of the grapevines to collect the rainwater. You can't make those on Cholamoid. Why? Because there's a lot of work involved. So even though all these examples of what you were doing, you're doing it for the Beis HaShalchan, and the Beis HaShalchan needs water, and without the water, it can get ruined, and they should qualify under the category of Davar Ovid, preventing loss. Nonetheless, if there's going to be a lot of work involved, then we don't allow you to do it, even to prevent loss. And in the case of the rainwater, from the pool of the rainwater, we don't allow you to do it because we don't want people to get confused with that in a well. But if we're talking about something that doesn't involve a lot of effort, such as the first part of the Mishnah Mashkin, where you're watering it, like I say, exactly how you're doing it, I don't know, but there's not a lot of work involved in it, and allowing this spring water to come through, I guess, with some kind of irrigation canals or channels. That would be allowed to do in a case of a weak field to prevent loss. But if it's a field that could survive on rainwater, then you cannot bring in more water for the purpose of making sure that you have enough. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Rabbi.